A 15-year-old girl sends a final message to her boyfriend late at night. 6 words that would haunt an entire community forever. Andy's in my room. I'm scared. Hours later, she vanishes without a trace. What investigators uncovered next would expose a nightmare hiding inside an ordinary home, and reveal a crime so disturbing that even years later, people still struggle to understand how anyone could do this to a child.
Riley was the type of child you hope to have one day. She was kind and gentle and loving and full of life.
Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, is the kind of town where people know their neighbors. A quiet place surrounded by rolling hills, where serious crime is rare, and families often feel safe leaving their doors unlocked. It was the last place anyone expected a case like this to unfold. Among the town's residents was 15-year-old Riley Crossman. To her family, Riley was everything a parent could hope for. She loved art, music, dancing, and spending time with the people she cared about. She was close with her siblings and deeply loved by both her mother and father. Like many teenagers, she was focused on school, friends, and her future. She was also in a relationship with a boy named Hayden Lacey. The two had been dating for months and rarely spent time apart. If they weren't together, they were texting or talking on the phone. Riley believed she had found someone who truly understood her. From the outside, her life appeared normal, but on May 7th, 2019, that normal life came to a violent and tragic end. That Tuesday afternoon, Riley returned home from school around 3:30 p.m. When she entered the house, she found her mother, Chantel Oakley, asleep on the couch. Chantel worked multiple jobs and was exhausted. She had been feeling sick that day and had finally managed to get some rest. Riley accidentally woke her up, and in a moment of frustration, Chantel snapped at her daughter. It was a brief argument, the kind that happens in countless households every day. Neither of them knew it would be their final conversation. Later that evening, Chantel left for work. Riley remained at home. Also inside the house was Chantel's boyfriend, Andy Macaulay. When Chantel returned later that night, everything seemed normal. Andy was on the couch. Riley's bedroom door was closed. Believing her daughter had simply gone to bed early, Chantel went to sleep. The next morning, something felt strange. Every day, Riley would stop by her mother's room before leaving for school. She would say goodbye and let her know she was heading out. This time, that never happened. At first, Chantel assumed Riley was still upset about being yelled at the previous day. She checked her room and found it empty. Then she remembered that Hayden was leaving on a school trip to Washington, D.C. Thinking Riley had gone to school early to see him before he left, she tried not to worry. But before leaving the house, she noticed several things that didn't make sense. Riley's glasses were still there. Her phone charger was still there. And although Riley's room was usually messy, something about it felt wrong. She couldn't explain why. The room simply didn't look the way it normally did. As the hours passed, concern turned into panic. When Riley failed to come home after school, Chantel immediately contacted Hayden. The answer she received changed everything. Hayden told her he had not spoken to Riley all day. Their last conversation had happened the night before. Suddenly, the possibility that Riley had simply gone somewhere disappeared. Chantel contacted law enforcement and reported her daughter missing. Initially, investigators treated the case the way many missing teenager cases are treated. Teenagers sometimes leave voluntarily and return within a day or two. But when officers arrived at the house and began examining Riley's bedroom, the investigation took a dark turn almost immediately. While inspecting the room, investigators discovered bloodstains on Riley's mattress. They found additional stains on her pillow. Combined with the unusual condition of the room, those discoveries completely changed the direction of the case. This was no longer being treated as a runaway situation. Investigators began to fear something terrible had happened inside that bedroom. As news spread throughout the region, multiple agencies joined the search. Local police, state police, the FBI, and missing children organizations all became involved. Search teams formed. Volunteers flooded the area. Everyone hoped Riley would be found alive. Meanwhile, detectives focused on the people closest to her. They verified Chantel's work schedule. They confirmed her whereabouts. They examined every possible lead. Then they turned their attention to Riley's boyfriend. Hayden was still away on his school trip when investigators contacted him. During their conversation, he sounded worried and cooperative. When detectives asked whether Riley feared anyone, Hayden gave an answer that immediately caught their attention. He said there was only one person Riley was uncomfortable around, Andy Macaulay. The statement raised alarms. Detectives returned to question Andy again. He denied knowing anything about Riley's disappearance. He insisted she had no reason to fear him and claimed everything had been normal. But investigators weren't convinced. The following day, Andy agreed to take a polygraph examination. The results were inconclusive, not because the questions were unclear, not because the equipment malfunctioned. The test failed because Andy was under the influence of cocaine. Investigators had specifically warned him not to consume drugs before the examination, yet he arrived anyway. To detectives, it looked less like poor judgment and more like someone trying to sabotage the process. While Andy was being examined, Hayden was also speaking with investigators. That interview would become one of the most important moments in the entire case. Detectives asked about Riley's final hours. Hayden explained that they had spoken by phone late on the night of May 7th. Everything had seemed normal. Then he revealed something shocking. After ending their conversation and going to sleep, he received a message from Riley. The message arrived around 11:30 p.m. Hayden showed investigators exactly what she had written. "Andy's in my room. I'm scared." Those 6 words changed the entire investigation. They established that Riley was alive late that night. They established that Andy was in her bedroom. And they established that Riley was frightened. Most importantly, they contradicted Andy's earlier statements. He had claimed he went to bed around 10 p.m. The message suggested otherwise. Detectives now had a timeline problem, and Andy was at the center of it. They began digging deeper into his movements. Investigators contacted Andy's supervisor and learned something unusual. On the day after Riley disappeared, Andy showed up for work, but roughly an hour later, he requested several heavy-duty trash bags and left to supposedly perform work elsewhere. For approximately 5 hours, his activities became difficult to account for. 5 hours. More than enough time to conceal evidence. More than enough time to move a body. When detectives confronted him again, Andy's story began changing. At first, he claimed one thing, then another, then another. Each new explanation contradicted the previous one. Investigators noticed a pattern. Whenever evidence disproved one story, Andy simply created a different one. Surveillance footage made matters worse for him. Cameras captured his green truck traveling routes he initially denied using. One road stood out above all others, Tuscarora Pike. When confronted with video evidence showing his vehicle on that road, Andy altered his account once again. He claimed he had lied because he feared being caught using drugs. Detectives didn't buy it. The explanations felt less like truth and more like desperate attempts to stay ahead of the evidence. Despite their suspicions, investigators still lacked enough proof to arrest him for murder, so they continued searching. Day after day, volunteers combed fields, forests, and remote areas. The entire community became invested in finding Riley. Then forensic results arrived. Testing revealed that Andy's DNA had been found mixed with Riley's saliva on her pillow. The discovery was devastating. Investigators believed it supported a horrifying theory. They suspected Riley had been smothered while struggling against an attacker. The evidence pointed increasingly towards someone who had been inside that house, someone Riley knew, someone who should have protected her. Plans were being made to arrest Andy for kidnapping and assault, but before that could happen, search teams made a grim discovery. On May 16th, 8 days after Riley vanished, human remains were found in a remote area near Tuscarora Pike. The body had been concealed inside heavy black trash bags. The location was isolated and difficult to reach. At the scene, investigators couldn't immediately confirm the victim's identity because decomposition was advanced, but several details stood out. The victim appeared to be a young female. Her clothing was disturbed. Evidence suggested someone had attempted to move or reposition her body. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office. Soon afterward, dental records confirmed everyone's worst fear. The victim was Riley Crossman. The community that had spent days praying for a miracle was suddenly confronted with tragedy. The search was over. Now the focus shifted entirely toward justice. Although decomposition prevented medical examiners from determining the exact cause of death, the manner of death was ruled homicide. Additional evidence continued piling up. Investigators discovered a white construction compound on Riley's shoes. The same type of material was connected to locations and tools associated with Andy. They also found screws near the dump site that matched screws found among his work equipment. Individually, each piece of evidence might not have been enough. Together, they painted an increasingly clear picture. Detectives concluded that Riley was likely attacked inside her bedroom during the night. Based on the physical evidence and witness statements, investigators believed Andy entered her room after her mother had gone to sleep. What happened next may never be known in complete detail, but detectives believed Riley was silenced before she could call for help. The possibility of a sexual motive was also explored. While forensic evidence could not conclusively prove such an assault due to the condition of the remains, testimony later suggested investigators considered it a significant possibility. On May 16, 2019, Andy Macaulay was arrested and charged with Riley's murder. The case would eventually proceed to trial. When proceedings began, prosecutors wasted no time laying out their theory of the crime. They told jurors that although no one had witnessed Riley's murder, the evidence revealed a clear and disturbing sequence of events. At the center of that sequence was a message sent by a frightened 15-year-old girl shortly before she vanished forever. "Andy's in my room. I'm scared." Prosecutors argued that those words were more powerful than any witness testimony. Riley had no reason to fabricate a story. She wasn't speaking to investigators or trying to accuse someone of a crime. She was simply telling her boyfriend what was happening in real time. According to the prosecution, that message placed Andy Macaulay inside Riley's bedroom during the final known moments of her life. The state then began walking jurors through the mountain of evidence collected during the investigation. Witnesses described how Andy's account of his movements changed repeatedly whenever detectives confronted him with new information. Prosecutors highlighted each contradiction, arguing that innocent people generally tell one version of events. Andy, they said, had offered several. Jurors heard testimony about the surveillance footage that tracked his truck traveling routes he initially denied using. They heard about his unexplained absence from work and the hours investigators could not account for. Prosecutors argued that these were not innocent inconsistencies. They were the actions of someone trying to hide what he had done. Then came the forensic evidence. Experts explained the significance of the DNA recovered from Riley's pillow. Jurors learned that Andy's DNA had been found mixed with Riley's saliva. Prosecutors argued that the evidence supported the theory that Riley had been attacked inside her own bedroom. The state also presented evidence connected to the disposal of Riley's body. Investigators described finding her remains in heavy-duty trash bags along Tuscarora Pike, one of the same areas linked to Andy's movements after her disappearance. Additional testimony connected construction materials found near the body to items associated with his work equipment. Piece by piece, prosecutors built their case. The defense, however, attacked the investigation from a different angle. They reminded jurors that no witness had actually seen Riley die. There was no confession. There was no murder weapon. Due to the advanced decomposition of the remains, medical experts could not identify a definitive cause of death. The defense argued that the prosecution was asking jurors to connect dots rather than rely on direct proof. They emphasized that suspicion, even strong suspicion, was not enough to convict someone of murder. Throughout the trial, both sides battled over the interpretation of the evidence. What prosecutors viewed as proof of guilt, the defense described as assumptions. What investigators considered lies, the defense portrayed as confusion and poor memory. But as the testimony continued, jurors repeatedly returned to the same facts. The final message, the changing stories, the surveillance footage, the DNA evidence, and the discovery of Riley's body. For Riley's family, every day inside the courtroom was a painful reminder of what had been taken from them. They listened as strangers analyzed their daughter's final hours in extraordinary detail. They watched photographs, heard testimony, and relived the investigation that had consumed their lives since 2019. Eventually, after weeks of testimony, closing arguments concluded and the case was handed to the jury. The jurors retreated to deliberate. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The courtroom fell silent as the verdicts were read. Guilty. Andy Macaulay was found guilty of first-degree murder, concealment of a deceased human body, and child abuse resulting in death. For Riley's loved ones, the verdict brought relief, but not closure. Nothing could undo what had happened. Yet one final decision remained. Should mercy be granted? Under West Virginia law, a conviction for first-degree murder can include a recommendation of mercy, allowing the possibility of parole after 15 years. Without mercy, a defendant will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Riley's father addressed the court. His voice carried the weight of everything his family had endured. He spoke about the future Riley would never have, the birthdays she would never celebrate, the milestones she would never reach, the life she had been denied at just 15 years old. Then he asked a question that echoed throughout the courtroom. Where was the mercy for Riley? Where was the mercy when she was terrified in her own bedroom? Where was the mercy when her body was discarded like garbage?
Riley will be forever frozen in time, only living on in our memories now. She will forever be 15 years old to us. Counsel mentioned 15 years. In 15 years, he may be eligible for parole. She only got 15 years. So if this is a case of mercy, where was the mercy in this crime? Where was it? Where was the mercy when he walked into her room where she's supposed to feel safe? Where's the mercy when he attacked her? Where's the mercy when he put her in a trash bag and dumped her off the side of the road like garbage?
The jury had their answer. They recommended no mercy. The judge sentenced Andy Macaulay to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with additional consecutive sentences related to the remaining convictions. More than 2 years after Riley disappeared, the legal battle was finally over. Justice had been delivered. But for those who loved Riley Crossman, the sentence could never replace the future that was stolen from her. Today, Riley Crossman's final message remains one of the most haunting pieces of evidence ever presented in a murder case. 6 simple words, a desperate warning, a cry for help that arrived too late. Behind every true crime story is a real person whose future was stolen. Riley was not a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a teenager with her entire life ahead of her. And while justice was ultimately served, nothing can undo what happened inside that house on the night of May 7th, 2019. Some crimes shock communities. Some crimes leave investigators searching for answers. And some crimes force us to confront a darker truth, that the most dangerous threats are not always strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they are the people standing right inside the home. And that is what makes the murder of Riley Crossman a case that will forever make people question humanity.